Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we are literally popping the hood on human communication to decode the very mechanics of storytelling. We're going to look at the anatomy of literature, how stories are built piece by piece, and why understanding this underlying structure is an absolute necessity for human connection today. Okay, let's dive right into this. Have you ever played the game Pass the Message? You know, some of you might know it as telephone. You sit in a circle, someone whispers a phrase into your ear, and you have to frantically whisper it to the next person before you forget it. Now, imagine playing that, but the phrase you hear is a classic Filipino folktale line, like Si malakas at si maganda ay sinalan mula sa kawayan, the story of the strong and the beautiful being born from bamboo. Think about the chaotic, brilliant fun of trying to preserve that exact message down a line of 30 people. Well, that isn't just a game. It's actually the foundation of all human literature.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll trace the origin of stories. Second, we'll break down the 3 kinds of literature. Third, we'll dissect the 6 core literary elements. And finally, we'll look at exactly why literature matters today. So Section 1, the origin of stories, from mouth to manuscript. Remember that Pass the Message game? Well, that ties directly into the dawn of storytelling. Long before we had smartphones or the internet or, even books, our ancestors kept their entire history alive purely through oral tradition. They passed down their beliefs, their greatest heroes, and their warnings entirely by word of mouth. Think of majestic, sprawling epics like the Philippine story of Biak ni Lamang. These weren't read. They were recited, they were memorized, and shared around fires. But as human society evolved, we obviously needed a more permanent way to record our realities, and that gave birth to written literature. We moved from spoken word to scratching symbols onto clay tablets, then painting on papyrus, and eventually printing books.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the word itself. Literature is derived from the Latin root litera, which literally means letter. Think about how profound that is for a second. Literature is the practice of taking the most abstract, intangible things in the universe, our ideas, raw human emotions, ancient beliefs, complex experiences, and physically grounding them into written letters. It's a collection of these works serving as a mirror to the human soul.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 3 kinds of literature, or what we can call the vessels of narrative. If our experiences are like water, these structural categories are the vessels that hold them. Literature generally falls into 3 distinct kinds. First up, poetry. This is strictly structured using lines, stanzas, and rhythm. A fantastic modern Filipino example is the passionate, rhythmic spoken word poetry of Juan Miguel Severo. Second, we have prose. This is the structure you're probably most used to reading. It's written in standard paragraph form. Think of the massive libraries of Wattpad stories online, or the classic rich short stories by Nick Jochen. And finally, we have drama. The defining structure here is that it's written specifically to be performed live on stage by actors. Think of your local school plays or the traditional sinaculo performed during Holy Week. The container changes, sure, but the human experience inside remains exactly the same.
All right, Section 3, the 6 core literary elements. This is the true anatomy of a story.
So the crucial point is that every single story needs a foundation, and that foundation begins with our first 2 elements, setting and characters. The setting is simply the time and place. Let's make this vivid, okay? Imagine our setting is a deeply rainy, flooded day in modern-day Manila. You can already picture the gray skies and the heavy traffic, right? Now, within that setting, we need characters. At a minimum, you generally have a protagonist, our hero or main focus, and an antagonist, the force or villain opposing them. But characters in a setting just standing there doing nothing, that's a painting, not a story. A story needs an engine to drive it forward, and that engine is our 3rd element, conflict. Conflict is the problem, and it comes in 4 main flavors: man versus self, man versus nature, and man versus society. Imagine a highly relatable, localized dispute between 2 neighbors in a barangay over property lines during our rainy Manila day. That is a classic man versus man conflict, and it instantly creates tension.
Now, this tension builds into our 4th element, plot. The plot is the sequence of events. It's basically the staircase the story climbs. First, the exposition introduces our rainy Manila setting and our feuding neighbors. Then, the rising action happens as the argument escalates. Maybe someone's roof starts leaking into the other's yard. This builds all the way up to the climax, the point of absolute maximum tension, an all-out dramatic confrontation in the rain. After the storm breaks, literally and figuratively, we hit the falling action. As tempers cool, leading finally to the resolution, where the neighbors perhaps reach a begrudging compromise.
The final pieces of our literary anatomy are point of view and theme. Point of view is simply the perspective from which the story is told. Are we hearing this from one neighbor, the other neighbor, or maybe a neutral bystander? But the theme? Wow! The theme is the ultimate payload of the story. It is the deep life lesson the author wants to leave you with. In our barangay story, maybe after the fight, the floodwaters rise drastically, and those angry neighbors suddenly have to save each other's homes. The theme suddenly shifts to the powerful Filipino value of bayanihan, or community spirit. That is the true message hiding inside the mechanic. Which brings us to Section 4. Why literature matters today. Navigating the VUCA world. So how do ancient literary mechanics actually apply to our very modern reality? To understand this, we need to understand the environment we live in today. Experts describe our world using the acronym VUCA. Our world is volatile, meaning things change rapidly. It's uncertain. The future is incredibly hard to predict. It's complex, with a million moving parts to every single global issue. And it's ambiguous. Clear-cut answers are really rare. So how does analyzing a Wattpad story or a spoken word poem equip us to survive a VUCA environment? And this brilliantly illustrates our point. When the world outside is spinning fast, the stories we read and share act as cultural anchors. Literature teaches and reinforces core timeless values, like pagalang, which is respect, and pakisama, which is camaraderie and just getting along with others. By putting us in the shoes of totally different protagonists, it actively builds our empathy and sharpens our communication skills. Furthermore, it's the primary way we preserve our cultural heritage, ensuring that the identity of the past isn't just washed away by the volatility of the present. Look at this quote. It really hits the nail on the head. Literature helps us understand unchanging values in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. That is the core takeaway here. Literature is not just an academic subject where you memorize plot points for a quiz. It is the ultimate survival tool. It provides a steady compass of human empathy and shared cultural truth when absolutely everything else around us feels completely unpredictable. So, we end exactly where we began, with the idea of passing the message. From ancient oral epics whispered around campfires to the digital stories we consume on our screens right now, human beings are defined by the narratives we share. You're now equipped to see the anatomy behind those narratives, to recognize the themes, the conflicts, and the deeply held values within them. So, I leave you with this final provocative thought. In this unbelievably complex world, what story will you choose to pass on? Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with me. Keep reading, keep analyzing, and I will catch you next time.